Hello and welcome back to my channel. On this video, I'm going to talk about all of the books that I read in June of 2026, and I'm going to warn you in advance that this was a very high volume reading month for me, in part because I had 2 weeks of scheduled vacation, and I basically read my entire vacation. And if you are thinking, that sounds amazing, it was just as amazing as it sounds. So I have a lot of books that I got through, and let's dive in. So the first set of books that I read in June is the series by Holly Black that starts with White Cat, and then the second book in the trilogy is Red Glove, and then the third book in the trilogy is Black Heart. And I came across this because it had actually all been combined into one paperback called the Curse Breakers series. And they're individual books that I had available through my library on audio. I've read Holly Black before, some of her other stuff, but had not encountered this series. It's more of like a YA fantasy series. And it's about a teenage boy who has like this kind of magical system that runs throughout his family. And he thinks that he has been kind of exempted from that. Like he doesn't have this power or like set of powers, and then it turns out that he actually does, and it happens in like a particular kind of way. And I don't want to go into too much detail because I think it's just really fun to kind of like explore this world. And I ended up reading these like back to back. They're relatively short. Again, you can buy the entire series as like one paperback book, and it was like a fun way to kind of slide into the month. Then I picked up a book called This Is Our Story by Ashley Elston. And this is a book about a bunch of teenage boys who go into the woods for a hunting trip, and one of them gets killed. And there's a teenage girl who's working in like a lawyer's office as like an intern, and she gets kind of pulled into this because the lawyer's working on this case, and she knows some of these boys, and she ends up in a relationship with one of these boys. And we get to kind of understand what happened that caused this death on the trip. And it's basically just kind of this like YA mystery. And I actually really like this one. This is an author that I have read before, and it was fun to kind of like see the YA element of this because normally I've read this person as more of an adult mystery writer. Then I picked up a book called Winging It With You by Chip Pons. This is a male romance, a male queer romance about this guy who's going on this like reality TV show, like an adventure show, kind of like Amazing Race, or something like that. And his partner, who's supposed to go with him at the very last minute, pulls out. And so he ends up partnering with this like random guy he meets at the airport who's a pilot. And they end up going on this reality show together. And of course, they kind of start to develop feelings for each other. And I actually found this one to be like super fun. Like I love the reality show genre when it's kind of like pulled into romances. I think that there's a lot to play with there. And I had not read this author before. And so I enjoyed picking that one up. Okay, then I read Marion by Lee Rowan. This is the retelling of Psycho. I'm going to give away a little bit of a spoiler here because in Psycho, one of the things that happens is a woman is killed in the shower. If you have seen the film or clips of this, it's very famous. And in this particular book, she actually isn't killed. She turns around and kills the man who's trying to kill her. And then she kind of goes on the run. And this is a book that is a lot about like women's empowerment. It is set in contemporary times. So it is not set in the time period of the original movie. And I thought this was like a really fresh and creative take. I really enjoyed this one too. All right. I also picked up 3 of the books in Liz Tomford's series, and let me get this right, the Windy City series. So I picked up the 3rd book, the 4th book, and the 5th book. So the 3rd book is called Caught Up, the 4th book is called Play Along, and then the 5th book is called Rewind It Back. And these are sports-themed romances. I wanted to finish this series. I really liked the first 2. All of the characters are kind of interconnected. They're either like playing on the same sports team or they kind of are related to one another. Like, so you get to kind of see them developing over the course of the series. And those are some of my favorite kind of interconnected romances, especially if they're sports themed. So I would definitely recommend this series. I feel like there's a lot of range in the tropes that the author is using, as well as a lot of emotional depth in the relationships as well. Okay, then I picked up a book called The Revenge Mishap by Jax Calder. This is the 2nd book in the series that is called The Revenge Club. And this was the book that I had, I think, my reader roulette card. I was supposed to pick like a book that I thought would be a 5-star read for me. And the first book in this series I loved, and the second book I also loved. I am a huge fan of this author's humor. So he writes these rom-coms, and in this particular series, you have these queer romances between men where one of the men is like trying to get revenge on the other, basically. And in this particular one, there's like this mistaken identity, and one of the men thinks that this other guy is like his enemy, and it turns out it's the enemy's brother. And so through like this like very funny set of events, the guy ends up like breaking his ankle, and then the guy who was trying to get revenge has to like help him. So I don't want to give too much away, but the guy who breaks his ankle, that is the brother of the enemy, he is basically a children's like entertainer. And so he makes the guy who is trying to get revenge come along with him on these like children entertainment like parties and various things he has to do. And I was like laughing out loud at this book. And I'm not someone who typically like reads a lot of comedy or like finds this stuff funny, but I was like smiling and laughing throughout this entire book. Like this author's humor is just like the perfect fit for me. So I highly recommend both of the books in this series. There's a third one I think that's coming out. I will absolutely read it. And I'm also going to check out other books by this author as well. Okay. Then I read the first book in the Elvis Cole and Joe Pike series by Robert Crace. It is called The Monkey's Raincoat. And one of my goals for June was to read this entire 20-book series, and I had all of them on audio, and I read every single book in this series. So what you were seeing on the screen is like a selection of some of these books. I'm not going to put every single one up, and I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm just going to say very broadly that this is a series about kind of two private detectives, and they both have backgrounds in the military, and one of them is kind of like the funny one, and the other one is the very kind of like quiet, like intense one. That's Joe. And then Elvis is kind of the funny one. And they go about solving crimes together. And I love this series. I feel like the first 7 books, this is like the best thing about reading an entire series back to back. The first 7 books, you're just kind of getting a sense of like what is going on in their landscape of their world. So this is set in Los Angeles for the most part, although there's a few books that take place in other settings. And by book like 7, 8-ish, you start to do a deeper dive into each of these characters and their backgrounds. So you start to get like a little bit more understanding of like their motivations and what's going on. And then I feel like the series like really hits its stride, and you start to see the author like playing around with some things. He had a couple books that were like longer, that he was clearly going into more depth with the plot. But most of these books are relatively quick reads, and they're meant to be like fast-paced thrillers. They're not formulaic. Like I think they're all like very different in terms of like what's happening in the books. And you also see one of the main characters start to have like a deeper like romance with somebody. And I'm really glad that I like devoted time to reading the whole series, and then I read them in like relatively quick succession so that I could see the arc of like what was happening with the series over time. And I would definitely take on that experiment again of like trying to read like a large series in a relatively short period of time, because I feel like you see it so differently when you're binging it than if you're like reading it, you know, one a year, or, you know, you have a lot of time in between the books. Okay, so 20 of the books this month were that series, and I'm just going to pack them all into that description and move on to the other things I read. Okay, next I read a book called The Good Sister by Sally Hepworth. This is a book that I saw somebody recommend on social media, and it is basically about 2 sisters, one of whom is coded as like maybe autistic, but definitely kind of different in how she interacts socially. And then she has a sister who seems to be kind of like manipulative, and we aren't quite sure what's going on. And the sister who she works in a library, the one who's kind of seen as having kind of some social challenges. And she decides that she wants to potentially help the other sister have a baby. And so there's a big kind of plot point of this book revolving around that, and kind of what happens between these 2 sisters around this idea of the one who works in the library becoming pregnant. And this one was pretty twisty. I mean, I feel like it was a little bit standard for what I would typically expect, you know, for this kind of plot. There wasn't anything that like really blew me away, but I have read this author before, and I would absolutely continue to read her stuff too. All right, next I read a book called The 6 Types of Working Genius by Patrick Lencioni. And this is an author who's very well known for like leadership and team development work. And in this book, he's basically saying, like we see in many leadership books, there are like these different ways of categorizing like the gifts that people bring to their work. And if you can understand yourself and the people around you, you can kind of like balance each other out based on your types of what he calls working genius. And I love books like this. I'm always about, categorizing and kind of like putting people into different, ways of working with each other and thinking about how we can be different, but also supporting each other with our strengths. So I really like that one. Okay, next I read The Creativity Workbook for Coaches and Creatives. This is edited by Eric Maisel, and it has a bunch of different exercises that creativity coaches have brought together. I loved this book. I love creativity. I'm a coach. I was like super into all of these exercises. I'm so glad I picked this up. I would absolutely recommend this to other people. If you're interested in either creativity or coaching. There were like several pages of this that I was like dog-earing and like wanting to go back to again. And I really like the format of this. It was like very like relatively short chapters, all written by different people, where they kind of described a tool, they described how to use it in practice. They talked about kind of some of their experiences with it, and then they just, move on to the next tool. And it was a really great format, and the content was just something that I really enjoyed also. All right, so I went from that book to something that is quite a bit more heavy, and that is a book called Things in Nature Merely Grow by Yuyun Lee. And this is a book that it has won an award. It won the Pulitzer Prize. It was also a National Book Award finalist. I think this is how I came across it. This is a book that I want to give a lot of trigger warnings, particularly for suicide. It is a memoir. It is about a woman who has 2 sons who died by suicide several years apart. She has one son who commits suicide, and then like 5 years later, her second son, so she has only 2 sons, her second son also dies by suicide. And I don't think I knew fully like what this was when I went into it. This is an academic. She works, I think she's at Princeton, and she's a linguist. And so it's beautifully written. I'll just start there, I guess. But I would say that this is hard, I would imagine, for any parent to read this book. I happen to not be a parent, but I would imagine for any parent this would be challenging. And part of why I picked this up is because there's someone in my life who recently lost a child to suicide. And this has been something that I have been challenged to watch this person kind of process this and kind of go through this experience. It obviously is devastating. And so when I saw kind of generally what this was about, I was kind of intrigued to pick this up. And I took a lot away from it. I think what I took away is probably different from what other people would take away. It's one of those books that like, I think has just this really wide spectrum of possibility of like kind of how it might impact you. I'm so glad I picked it up. I absolutely see why it's winning awards. And I would probably look at other books by this author in the future. But this one in particular just felt like it's amazing to me to think about how somebody can process the amount of grief and other emotions that this author is feeling and be able to articulate it as clearly as she was able to in this book. Like that just feels like an incredible gift that she's able to do that. So yeah, hard to kind of recommend this one other than to say like, I found it to be really incredible. And I think that if anything about that sounds like it would be, useful for you or even healing for you, might be something to pick up. Okay, so the next book, entirely different. You're going to see me like swinging all over the place with the books that I was reading in June. The next book I read is called The Rachel Incident by Carolyn O'Donoghue. And this is a book about basically a woman and a man who are best friends. And the man is gay, the woman is straight, and they are in Ireland. And it's kind of their like a little bit of like coming of age together. They're in college, but they're both kind of dealing with relationships, and they're clearly very close with each other. And we see kind of the progression of what happens in their relationship over time. I really like this one. I think it's being adapted into, a TV show or a film, and I would absolutely watch the adaptation. Okay, then I picked up a book called Like Family by Erin O. White. And this is a book about like three interconnected families. I think they're like in upstate New York. And there's a couple of kind of queer couples, and then a man and a woman who are married, and they're all kind of intersecting for various reasons. Sometimes it's like their children, or they're like related, and they kind of, but they're all kind of like in and out of each other's lives. And a couple things happen, and I don't really want to give away the plot to this, but like a couple things happen that are just kind of like relatively normal life events, but they kind of force some conversations amongst this group of people. And it's a little bit about just kind of like midlife development and like how you, even like after you've come into adulthood, you continue to have like transformation and evolution. And I really liked that about this. And I liked kind of the adult interactions that were happening throughout this book. I don't know where I came across this one. It might have been in like my Publisher's Weekly that I found that, but I really like that one too. Okay, next up, I read a book called The Wrong Daughter by Dandy Smith. And this is about a woman who goes missing when she's like an adolescent, and then she comes back as an adult. And her sister doesn't really believe that the woman who comes back is the actual woman who left. Like she feels like it's like a con artist kind of situation. And she's like working through that as like everyone is starting to accept this person as being her original sister. And this one had what I would just call like a very unbelievable plot twist that could have been done differently, or maybe like set up differently, and I might have been okay with it, but it just felt so fantastical to me. This one, like, I just didn't enjoy it as much because of it. Like, I feel like I wanted it to be more real than fantasy, and it came across as like very fantastical. And I don't know that that was the author's intent, but it was definitely kind of how I perceived it. So this was not a favorite for me. I might pick up another by this author, but that one was like not necessarily one that is gonna like stick in my mind. All right, next up, I picked up The Hot Shot by Piper Rain. This is a sports romance that is a baseball theme. And it is basically about a situation where a woman inherits the children of family members because they die unexpectedly. And so she becomes a guardian. And she is supported by this male main character who happens to be a baseball player, like a professional baseball player. And they're kind of navigating through this situation. I have read other books of this type. I feel like there's actually kind of a subgenre that is this kind of like you become a guardian of children and then you're like having a romance with somebody. And there are others that I liked better. I would probably read this author again because this felt like the beginning of a series. I'm not sure if this is a standalone or if it's in a series, but it was good enough that I would kind of continue to explore the work of this author. But it's not, there are other sports romances that I've read recently, and I've read quite a few that I felt like were just like a little more nuanced, had a little more depth. And the plot and kind of the storyline got expanded in these other books. I feel like this actually was kind of short, based on like what was happening and what was happening with the character development. All right, the next book I read is called The Lost Girls of Paris by Pam Janoff. This is a book about a woman who discovers this like suitcase at a train station that's full of photographs. And she's trying to figure out the history of these photographs. And it turns out that there were these women who were kind of doing like spy work. And so we get a little bit of the like background of the history of these women. And it is, historical fiction. It kind of goes back and forth in time. I like Pam Janoff. This is like, there are other books of hers that I've read and I liked better, but I definitely will be diving more into her backlist. I feel like she's a very solid historical fiction writer, and would definitely continue to read her work in the future. All right, next up I read a book, nonfiction, called Start Your Fire. This is a modern guide to early retirement by Dylan Redling. I absolutely read this because I was on vacation, and my vacation felt like retirement. And I was like, okay, how do I just like figure out early retirement? I've definitely read stuff in this FIRE, it stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early, in this genre before. I'm familiar with this concept. And this one was a pretty good introduction. It felt a little bloggy. Like, I think that the author, and I'm realizing, I think there's two authors, like a husband-wife couple that wrote this. And I think they have a blog. And so it's a useful like introduction if you've like never heard of this before and you're like, what is she talking about? It might be a book to pick up. There's a ton of different books on FIRE out there, and this was one that just happened to be in my local library. All right, then I picked up a book called Hidden Brilliance, Unlocking the Intelligence of Autism by Lynn Kern Kogel. I believe this has more than one author. Yeah, Claire Lezebnik. And this is one of the first books that I read about autism and children and advocacy. And I've read quite a bit in the neurodivergent space. If you've been watching for a while, you know, this is kind of like a sub, genre of things that I read on the nonfiction side. And I read mostly about adults who are experiencing neurodivergence, in part because I coach a lot of adults who are neurodivergent. And I actually have a coach training class on coaching neurodivergent clients. And so this is partly why I'm kind of like staying up with this literature. And so it's unusual for me to read a book about children because I don't have any children. And so it's not necessarily an area of interest. But this was something that was interesting to me because it talks a lot about how kind of like school systems deal with autistic children in particular, and how parents often have this like, honestly, sometimes a burden of like really advocating to make sure their children are getting what they need. And this was just not something I knew very much about. It's not part of my, background, history, personal life. And so I found it to actually be really interesting. And this is a book, I have a couple folks that I know who have children who are neurodivergent, and I would absolutely recommend this, and I'll pass it along, to somebody that I know who has this circumstance. And I felt like it did present a lot of issues to me that were just kind of new and things that I hadn't considered. Next, I read Write a Must Read by A.J. Harper, and this is primarily about how to write nonfiction. And I really liked this. I actually thought, if I were to write a nonfiction book that I was trying to have be like a trade published book, all of my books thus far, I've written several nonfiction books, are academic presses. And if I wanted to write a trade book, I would absolutely pull this out and like leverage, there's like different tools and like suggestions and coaching and questions and activities. And I thought this was really good. This is somebody who kind of like runs a program for nonfiction writers and has taken that and kind of put it into book form. And I found it to be highly valuable. So this is one that I would definitely kind of keep in my back of my mind if I was ever gonna write in that way. Okay, then I read The Paris Match by Kate Claiborne. And I read a different book by this author. I think it was called Love Lettering. It was the first book I read by her, and I really, really enjoyed it. So I've kind of kept an eye out for her, and this is her latest. It has this fun Hunchback of Notre Dame theme. It's about a woman who goes to the wedding of her ex's sister. So it's like her ex-sister-in-law is getting married in Paris, and she's invited to the wedding, and she decides to go. And when she's there, a bunch of things happen, and she ends up getting kind of like forced to like partner with the best man, who's this very like grumpy, scarred, both physically and otherwise, man. And they of course have a romance, and he's kind of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. And we see this theme kind of happening throughout the novel. And this was one of those books that I read on ebook, and I did listen to a lot of audio. You may have picked this up. And when I read a book on ebook, I want it to be typically like a really good romance that'll just like turn the pages, or like something that's very like plot driven. And I think I read this in like 2 sittings. I want to say it's like 400 to 500 pages. So it's not small, but I really enjoyed it. I love the character development. It felt very realistic to me. And I will absolutely continue to read this author in the future. Okay, next up I read a book by Nevada Barr called The Rope. This is, I think, book 16, maybe 17 in her Anna Pigeon series. I'm getting very close to the end of this series. And this is basically a book that goes back in time to like one of her very first cases, which I like. I like the back in time. But I can start to tell, like, now that I'm this far into the series, this is a mystery series, long running, about a woman who solves mysteries, and they're all in a different national park in the United States. And I can tell that the series is getting just a little bit tired. And I'm curious, because I've got 2 books left in the series. I'm going to assign myself to read them very soon so I can just kind of wrap this up. But I'm starting to wonder if this is the series kind of like coming to its natural close, because I feel like the author is kind of like pulling tricks out of the hat. And I wonder like what happened to the sales, you know, of this series because of the nature of, you know, like where the plot's going. And like I can tell that she's like trying to kind of maybe revive things a little bit. I still love the character. I do enjoy like reading this series. It's kind of something I can like have on in the background when I'm like listening to it on audio. Like those shows, you know, that you have on in the background. This is one of those series I can do that with. And I'm excited to wrap it up and see what I think. All right, then I reread Shield of Sparrows by Devney Perry in preparation for reading Rights of the Starling, which I did not get to this month. It's one of the books that got bumped to next month. And I really liked revisiting this. I had forgotten a lot of the like smaller details, and it's exactly why I like to reread like a book one before I reread a book two or read a book two for the first time. I want to kind of refresh myself, and I needed that on this particular one. So I'm glad that I did that. And I do have it on audio, so I just kind of listen to it, and I'll plan to hopefully pick up the next one this month. Okay, then I read The Fine Art of Lying by Alexandra Andrews. And this is a book, I think it might be like a Reese's Book Club book, or it's like a celebrity book club book. It takes place in the art world, and there's a woman who, let me see what I can give. I don't want to give anything away. I think I can say pretty safely, because it's probably in the book description, that she has an affair. And I will keep it vague, and then somebody ends up dead. And we're trying to figure out why. And there's like an art theft component, and it sounds kind of like thriller, fast-paced. I would say it's not so much. It's more kind of like this woman's like drama that she gets embroiled in, and I liked it. But I also feel like it was like relatively standard in terms of like a mystery or a thriller that you would expect kind of in this genre. The art world part made it kind of interesting. Like that was a little bit more unusual, and I enjoyed that part. And I would probably pick up another book by this author in the future. Like I think I liked it enough that I would try something else out. All right, then I finished a book called Yoga Revolution by Jivana Heyman. And this is a book basically about yoga, social justice, advocacy, and how yoga traditionally has been grounded in principles that you could absolutely apply to kind of like social justice mission and kind of what you're trying to do if that is something that you want to advocate for. And what I appreciated about this is the author ties his own experience into, you know, like both what he's trying to explain from kind of a yoga studies perspective, but also kind of his own interpretation of things in his own life. So he's someone who is very involved in kind of the AIDS movement in the 80s. He is also queer identified, and so like he brings that into his practice. He's also incredibly well known in the accessible yoga community. He's written books on creating accessibility for yoga, which includes doing things like chair yoga and other kinds of yoga. And I was just really wanting to like deepen my understanding of his perspectives, and I really liked this. I feel like when I read yoga books and I incorporate them into just like my reading practice, like they're so regulating, and I need more yoga books. So I will try to build more of those into the future, but that's one that I could definitely recommend. Okay, then I read By Any Other Name by Jodi Picoult. This is her book about kind of an alternative history of Shakespeare, and like what if Shakespeare didn't write his plays and someone else did, and it was a woman, and like what would that story be? And it goes back and forth between historical time and current time, and there is a playwright who is a contemporary woman, and then this playwright who is in the historical time. And what I would say is this book is very feminist in nature. And I would say like very overtly feminist in nature, which is not necessarily something I don't like, but having like trained for many, many years in women, gender, and sexuality studies, which is like, I have a couple graduate degrees in that. This is a book that like, I was just kind of like, yep. Like I've kind of seen and heard and am aware, and like, there's nothing here that's kind of like shocking to me or interesting to me, or, you know, like, I mean, not that it's not interesting, but like I've kind of seen all of this before, and I believe all the things that she's saying, and like I can't really imagine getting a group of people together and like having a book club conversation about this, because it would be like, yep, we all agree with these things. Like the politics of the things that she's kind of engaging around feel very like normal and familiar to me. I would imagine there's a group of people that is not true for, that they would read this book and it would kind of open their eyes to be kind of thinking about this alternative history with Shakespeare, and like thinking about like the role of women and people of color in like, you know, contemporary playwriting, and all the things that come along with that, you know, bias and power differential. And I think that all of those things are like worth talking about. But they were kind of at a baseline of like knowledge that I already have. And I think for other people, it would feel new and fresh and interesting. And it was less fresh for me because this is all like kind of theoretical stuff that I've thought about in the past. There are other things that Jodi Picoult has written that do feel new and fresh for me when she has kind of these like legal thrillers and it's kind of these ethical quandaries. And I tend to like that more than what was kind of the foundation for this particular book. Okay, next I read Loving Lieutenant Lancaster. This is the 4th book in the Lancaster family series by Sarah M. Eden. These are like a very clean set of Regency romances, and they all involve like intersecting family members in the Lancaster family. And this is the brother, one of the brothers. And these are just lovely. Like, I think they're so great, and I'm sad there's only 5, and I'll probably finish the 5th one next month. But I absolutely would kind of seek out more from this author. I think that these are kind of like palate cleansers. Like they're all with different tropes, and the way that these characters end up like coming together, it just feels so genuine and kind. And like it's, if you're a clean romance fan and that's kind of what you're looking for, I would definitely recommend this series for you. All right, then I read Count My Lies. This is by Sophie Stava, and this is the book about basically a pathological liar. The main character is a pathological liar, and there's a twist that happens, I would say, I don't know, maybe like 50 to 60% through, that I did see coming. I'm not sure if everyone would see it coming, but I saw it coming, and I was like, yep, that's kind of where I thought this was headed. I still liked it, and the ending is very satisfying. And so it's twisty and it's fun. And she basically kind of, the main character who's the liar, she kind of embroils herself with his family, and she becomes their nanny, and a lot of things happen from there. It's definitely kind of like it feels like kind of like a suburban thriller, you know, in terms of like what happens. I think it takes place in New York, but anyway, so for what it's worth, it's twisty, and I believe this one is also being adapted into like a film or a TV series. Okay, then I picked up and read almost back to back The Wildwood Chronicles by Colin Malloy. And what a just like charming series that I was completely not expecting. And I had no idea. So this came across my radar because apparently this is a film that is coming out in like October of this year. And this is a trilogy that is middle grade fiction, which I obviously don't read as much as I should because I loved it. It is from like 2012. So it's like almost 15 years old. And it's basically about this young girl who's like 12 years old. And one day she's with her 1-year-old brother, and he gets kidnapped by crows and taken into the woods. And she has to rescue him. This is like book 1, basically. And this checked every box. It reminded me of like The Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil A. Frankweiler, if you know that book. It reminded me of like so many of the classic, nostalgic, like YA books of my youth. It was like this author went out and found it and was like, what are the tropes that like everybody loved? It reminded me of Madeline L'Engle's work. I mean, like there were just so many things that I was like, you have picked the best parts of YA fiction and combined them into this series. And the author is I think the lead singer of the Decemberists, which is a band that I'm unfamiliar with, but now we'll go look up. His partner is an illustrator. This was like the other amazing part of the series. She's got art that she's embedded throughout this set of books. So you've got this like husband-wife pairing that are like these incredible artists. Like he writes the story and she illustrates it, and she's like very well known on her own for all these illustrations she's done. And it takes place in Portland, Oregon, which is where I grew up as a kid. So I was like, okay, this is perfect. Like this is literally perfect for me. And I loved it. I read them on audio, and I like had the paperback in front of me. I bought the trilogy, and so I was like flipping through and looking at the illustrations. This is a perfect fall read, like perfect. And if you've got like a middle grade and you want to do like a read aloud, perfect for that. And if you're like, I have no excuse to read this because I have no middle grade anybody in my life, doesn't matter. Just pick it up. You'll love it. If any of this is sounding interesting to you, like I think you would really, really enjoy that one. So I read all three, and they're all like 500 to 600 pages each. Like these are not short books. And also I saw some people saying they did not like the audio of the first one. I thought it was fine. And then the latter two are read by the author. So for what it's worth, like such a great fall read. I would absolutely highly, highly, highly recommend this trilogy. It was so fun. Okay, just a couple more. Next, I read a book called Heart's Landing by Melanie Harlow. And I would say this is a very standard small town romance kind of situation. There's like reminded me a little bit of like a Gilmore Girls kind of feel. And there's like a little mystery that gets embedded in it, and that gets solved by the end, and we kind of know what happened. And there are these two main characters who like knew each other as kids, and then she went away and then she comes back, and then they have kind of a romance. It's like a second chance romance kind of trope. And I liked it. I mean, I would pick up other stuff by this author, but I felt like it was also pretty standard. Like it felt a little bit like I said, a little bit Gilmore Girls-y, if that's something that you like in your kind of small town romance. And there were some fun side characters in that one too that I really enjoyed. Okay, and then the last book that I read in the month of June is called The Other Bennett Sister by Janice Hadlow. And this is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, and it's focused on Mary Bennett, who is one of the sisters in Pride and Prejudice, that is not really given a ton of attention in the book. And we see kind of the two older sisters getting married off. We see something kind of dramatic happen with one of the younger sisters, which I don't want to give too much away if you haven't read Pride and Prejudice. But this one is all focused on Mary, and I really, really liked this. I picked it up because, again, it's being adapted. I think it already has been actually, and I wanted to watch it. And so I was looking forward to kind of seeing what this would be. And I, really, really enjoyed it. I loved that part of it takes place in the time period of Pride and Prejudice. So you're like seeing the scenes of that book through the lens of Mary's character. And then there are other parts that kind of like speed forward into the future after the parts of Pride and Prejudice. And so you see kind of the follow-up, and just like super creative. And if you are a Jane Austen fan, 100% pick this up. I think you would love the writing. I think you would love the plot. And it's just a kind of fresh take on focusing on the character of Mary Bennett. So those are all of the books that I read in June of 2026. Some amazing reads in there. And I hope you'll stick around to see what I'm hoping to read in July of 2026. You can check out my upcoming TBR video soon. And until then, happy reading.